Alright, it's time to do Bellator predictions for tomorrow's card. Once again, going through the undercard. Excuse me. Going through the undercard and talking about the fights that matter, which is more than usual this time around, actually. We have 3 fights I'm going to talk about. The other fights, it's a problem I've said before with Bellator, is 1, the fighters in their undercard tend to not be very good. 2, they tend to not be very known. And 3, they tend to not stay in Bellator very long. So, you know, they don't even really build them up. Chase Beebe, Travis Marks, bantamweight qualifier feature fight. Presumably the winner of this will get into the bantamweight tournament. We've seen in the past that's not happened due to a number of reasons. So, maybe, maybe not. But Chase Beebe fighting at 135. Historically, always I'm going to pick him at 135. When he fights at 135, he's a bigger guy. He's an amazing wrestler. His stand-up is serviceable. He's not grappling deficient. He has good cardio. He pushes the pace. Basically, he's a little bit of a Clay Guida in a weird way. I think he's more technical with his wrestling. He's not quite as pushy the pace. He's not quite as cardio gifted. But there are some similarities there you can draw. Travis Marks, he's a good fighter, reasonably big for 135. A good wrestler, good power, but not particularly technical in any regards to stand-up or any, particularly amazing, exciting stuff that he can pull on the ground. He's a wrestler who has some heavy hands for the weight class. I gotta go with BB. Unanimous decision. Probably doesn't finish him because neither of these guys are the type to really finish a guy, which is unfortunate. It's not gonna be a great fight or anything, but it's good to get. It's good that fighters of this caliber are actually having a fight to get in the 135 tournament. It indicates that the 135 tournament will be probably pretty good, talent-wise. Ben Saunders, Raul Amaya. We've seen this fight before, and it really wasn't that long ago, so I have to say it probably goes the same way. Amaya will be able to take down Ben Saunders, but he won't be able to control him. He'll spend a lot of time getting out of submissions, and Ben Saunders will go on in the tournament to the finals. Which is really sad. This is you cannot put a tournament semifinal on the undercard. It's stupid. It's robbing you of the ability to promote the fight, quite frankly. In a feature fight here for a change, I'll break down Jesse Suarez versus Jordan Smith. Both guys have shown inconsistency, moments of very solidness. They both have some big name wins that you wouldn't really expect from guys who are fighting on a Bellator undercard and not in a tournament bout. In the end, I'm going to go with Jesse Suarez, or not Suarez, Juarez. Pardon me. I don't know why I keep saying Suarez. I think he's slightly more consistent, I guess. Jordan Smith does tend to have a bit of a fall apart mechanism when things start going against him, and at some point I think it will in this fight. Call it a rear naked choke for Jesse Juarez. Light heavyweight tournament semifinals. Michael Zayats versus Jacob Noe. Jacob Noe beat Seth Petrozelli. Zayats beat Babalu Sabral. Babalu being the more impressive win. But I think the fashion of Noe's win was more impressive. He went in there. He dominated Seth Petrozelli in a fight that most people probably had Petrozelli winning, but it was probably the more competitive one on the card. Zayats was arguably losing to Babalu up until knocking him out, proving that, he can do that. The problem is Babalu's chin has not looked great in recent years. His tendency to get rocked is much higher. His tendency to get knocked out is much higher. Zayats is the more technical striker in this fight, but Noe's got a pretty big size advantage. 6'2" to 6 foot, that's not the big deal, but you look at the build of Zayats, he's more of an overblown 185er than a proper 205er. Noe's a pretty big 205er. You couldn't see him fighting any lower, let's put it that way. Oddly, I'm going to go with Jacob Noe. I'm going to say he wins by decision, but don't count Michael Zayats out of this. I think he is the better technical fighter, but I think the size and in some ways the athleticism of Noe will probably carry the day. Welterweight tournament semifinal, number 2, Douglas Lima versus Brian Baker, which of course was the nightmare of, I guess, this Final Four, is that Ben Saunders had fought all 3 guys in the Final Four, and it actually lost all 3 guys in the Final Four. That's why we ended up with, except for Raul Maya, that's why we wound up with Ben Saunders, Raul Maya. I think they do like to push Ben Saunders. And I don't have a problem with it. I mean, Ben Saunders is a very remarkable guy. I mean, he speaks very well. He's an exciting fighter. He's never going to win a boring fight. He's the perfect guy to push, but, you know, it's clear that he's probably not going to win this tournament. The winner of this fight will. Douglas and Brian Baker. Similar fighters in the fact that I wouldn't really call them specifically one thing. I think they're both reasonably well-rounded. But if I had to break it down, I'd say the striking advantage goes to Lima. The wrestling advantage goes to Brian Baker. The ground advantage, I don't particularly see either guy submitting each other unless there's a rocking involved. I'd like to go with Douglas Lima because I have hopes that he can learn from past mistakes, improve, and give Ben Askren a good fight. Whereas I just don't feel Ben Askren versus Brian Baker is a fight that, to be honest, anyone particularly wants to see, and that anyone's particularly in doubt of the results. Baker, historically, you know, if he gets put on his back, he'll get put on his back repetitively, and that's kind of what Ben Askren does. That being said, we still haven't seen Lima defend takedowns from a good wrestler. Baker's got some reach that's going to kind of, you know, nullify the reach advantage Lima usually has, even if he is the better striker. Baker's not that chinny. I mean, we've seen him get knocked out, so I mean, there's definitely that possibility, but I'm going to go with Brian Baker via unanimous decision in what should be a very competitive fight and one that I'm looking forward to. King Mo Lawal, Emmanuel Hardkiller Kid Newton. Ironically, Emmanuel Newton is actually the taller fighter here, which always stunned me. I really thought King Mo was bigger than 6 feet tall. In the end, I mean, Newton's a really undersung guy in this tournament in general. People don't really know him, despite his days in the IFL, and he's fought a lot of big names, a lot of guys who are in the UFC now. A couple of them even have losses to Hardcore Kid Newton. But in the end, I mean, he brings a lot of the same tools as King Mo to the table, and they're not as good. They're both wrestler bases. King Mo's a much better wrestler. They both have interesting stand-up, slightly unorthodox, but King Mo's is, again, I think just has that edge in power, technique, and speed. And on the ground, you know, I would say Newton is probably the better submission artist than King Mo. But does that mean he will submit King Mo? No. King Mo, Newton's pretty tough. So, I mean, my only debate really is, does he finish him or does he ride out a decision? So let me quickly rephrase myself on who's finished Hardcore Kid Newton in the past. 3 people, 2 submissions, 1 TKO. Has not been TKO'd since Brian Eversalt did it way back in 2003. I'll give Newton the benefit of doubt. I'll say he makes it the distance with King Mo. And King Mo will go on to win the tournament and eventually become Bellator 205 champion because there's no one in the division. Shambalaya versus Rad Martinez. Featherweight tournament championship. I've given my pick on this twice, I think. I'm going with Rad Martinez. I think that the superior wrestling, I think the superior size, to be honest. Shambalaya does not look like that big of a featherweight. Not saying he needs to cut the bantamweight or anything, because I think Rad Martinez is actually a reasonably large featherweight. But I think the wrestling edge will prove definitive here. I think he'll be able to take Shambalaya down. I think he'll be able to hold him down to a reasonable extent. I think he'll be able to pepper him with ground and pound. I think on the feet, Martinez has got a good enough chin that Shambalaya is not really going to catch him with anything. And I think he's, you know, defensively grappling sound enough to not get submitted. I don't see how he finishes him. Shambalaya, well, a striker, really isn't a bad grappler. And Martinez hasn't really shown much of a finishing ability. But I got Rad Martinez pushing the pace, and getting the takedowns, grinding him down. Maybe there's a rear naked choke in there or something, but probably a decision for Rab Martinez. And he will go on to fight Pat Curran. And unfortunately, whoever fights Pat Curran out of these, well, actually, it'll be the winner of Curran, Daniel Strauss, but that kind of goes without saying that if Strauss can beat Curran, he'll be the winner of this fight, and Curran will be the winner of this fight. So, I don't know. Somewhat the unimpressiveness of Bellator is the gap between their champions and their number one contenders, although Strauss Curran's a good fight, so maybe we'll have a good one there. Anyways, that's my picks. Enjoy the card. It's pretty good. I mean, as much as I'm relatively confident in most of my picks here, except for the Jacob Noe Zayas fight, there should be some good stuff. I think Baker Lima going to be a very good fight. I think Shambalak Martinez will be pretty exciting. I think that Noe versus Zayas is a very interesting fight. I think that if you choose to watch the undercard, I think you're in for a treat with Ben Saunders Raul Maya. And it's pretty good. It's doesn't have the talent level of a UFC card, but I think people are kind of overlooking Bellator to a certain extent and like, oh, they're not in the UFC. A lot of these guys could do very well in the UFC. Let's just put it that way. King Mo could fight John Jones for the title, and I don't really know who would stop him from getting to that point. So there you go.